So now we're going to return to our perfect competition diagram, and we're going to add some dynamism to it, and we're going to see how it fits into this larger market. We begin, though, by a quick review. So to find out if the company is making money or not, we find where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. So demand is marginal revenue is price. Demand is perfectly flat because it's perfectly elastic, right? Perfectly competitive market, and this is just one firm. So price, so this is totally flat, and the same thing as price, and price is the same thing as marginal revenue. So where marginal cost equals marginal revenue, that's our quantity. That's how much that particular firm makes. Well, at that quantity, how much, what's the highest price that they can sell? Well, selling everything. In other words, what's the demand? We reference the demand. We get a price. So this is our price. Not terribly interesting because in this model, the price is constant. Remember, every firm is a price taker. No matter how much they produce, the price stays the same. We also check to see where the costs are. This is the revenue per unit. What are the costs per unit? And we find that by looking at quantity at average total cost. This is economic profit. This is not merely the amount of money that the company has left over after it's paid everyone that it needs to pay. This is not merely the profit that people collect. This is the economic profit. This is saying not only are you collecting money, you are collecting above and beyond what is normal. Opportunity cost is already baked into this diagram. Well, to see how this connects then to the larger market, we'll have the market over here, where there are many firms. If this company is making a lot of money, if they can be doing so much more, then that encourages people to enter the market. And if they enter the market, the supply curve will shift to the right. Supply curve will shift. That will bring prices down and quantity up. But note that brings prices down not just for the whole market, but of course it brings it down for the whole firm too, for the individual firm, for every firm. In equilibrium, it brings it down such that the cost equals the price. In other words, they are making zero economic profit. Now, again, it's hard to come up with like a truly perfectly competitive market because, as we discussed, a lot of companies really focus on trying to make their products different from one another, which means it's not homogeneous. But a lot of farmers, for example, if they're selling commodities like corn, soy, or wheat, or barley, while there's obviously grades, the ability to really distinguish yourself from other sellers is very limited. And you are essentially, unless you're doing something weird, you're essentially in the commodity business. You're essentially in something that kind of looks like a perfectly competitive market. Easy to enter and enter, lots of buyers and sellers. But everyone knows what they're buying, perfect information, homogeneous products. And so if you pick a random farmer who's selling corn, they're probably not making any more or less than some other random farmer selling corn. The only differences might be maybe one farmer has more land or maybe more equipment, but generally speaking, maybe the land is better too, of course. They don't work as well. But generally speaking, it's hard to make an exceptionally large, an exceptionally large amount of money when things are so competitive. And if they do happen to be competitive, and if you do happen to make a lot of money, don't expect it to last. The way we get to this idea of in the long run all companies make zero economic profit is through the elimination principle. Above normal profits are eliminated by entry, or economic profits are eliminated by entry, and below normal profits are eliminated by exit, or economic losses are eliminated by exit. Now again, I want to emphasize that the world is more complicated than the pure competition model. The pure competition model is just a starting point. And so we can recognize that this, in that pure competition model, will be very, very strong pressure. But even commodities, while they are more or less homogeneous, there's a lot of different cost structures that people face. Some people are better at it than others. So I'm not saying that in the real world, even something like commodities, you're going to get this, zero economic profit, that everyone makes roughly the same amount of money. What I am saying is that variance is going to decrease as a result of the lack of differentiation of this movement toward the pure competition model. And the reality is this is a pressure that exists regardless of where we are. Some companies, some industries, this is a relatively small pressure, and we'll go into a great deal of that when we discuss monopolies. Other companies, it's going to be a big pressure, but it's always kind of there. It's always kind of there, and it's just one of these concepts that we should have in the back of our mind. And when a company is making tons of money, we shouldn't assume that that's going to go on forever. When Apple does make a lot of money, in part because it's a very distinguished product and it has some kind of brand power, but it doesn't make as much money as maybe it used to, in part because when it made so much money making the iPhone, a lot of other people made the iPhone too, their own version of it at least, their own smartphone. And that competitive pressure took away Apple's power. But it had so much money, it made so much money, that attracted entry. At the same time, when Amazon came around and completely remade the book market, borders went away. Even only Barnes & Noble, who I understand is not doing super well. I don't know if they're going to even be around. I don't know how much longer they'll be around. But that's another idea that they're certainly better off with borders gone than when they're around. Right? They're doing better. Right? Streaming services killed Blockbuster, or consumers killed Blockbuster because they had access to streaming services. Right? Below normal profits are eliminated by exit. The market changes. We're constantly chasing that equilibrium. The issue is where that is also always changing. So it looks like maybe things are random, but if where you're going is always on the move, then you're always on the move. But that doesn't mean you're moving randomly. You're always moving to this point. So some time ago, go to my website here. So this is my website. Some time ago, if you go into research, this is pretty old, but it's still active. You see that I have these Wolfram demonstrations I made. Here's a competitive model. If you go to the competitive model here, this is essentially a digital version of the diagram that you can manipulate and maybe get some better intuition as to how it works. So you can download you have to download it, and then you download this player. I've already installed it. It's right here. This gets into the math of what's going on, but we care about this. Make this bigger. No, okay, yeah. So we have three things we can vary. If I bring price up, see that green box? It's a little hard to see, but now this company is making money. Lots of people like that money. And as people enter, the price begins to fall. The quantity is falling. You'll see the quantity is falling, but of course the market as a whole is growing. Quantity is falling, and then eventually we have zero economic profit. If we go the other direction and there's a loss, Then companies leave the market, prices begin to rise, the loss shrinks. Right? You can see it shrinking until it gets to 0. Again, I emphasize, this company was making a certain amount. You see it was making 8. It was making lots of economic profit. If we bring it down to 0 economic profit, or at least close to it, it's making, I think I set it up to be about 4, so half as much. You might say, well, that's in conflict with what we saw in the diagram when we shifted the supply curve out, like quantity increased while quantity for the individual firm fell. Of course, quantity for the individual firm fell, right? It's not profitable going up that higher point on the marginal cost curve, right? That's very high cost. But because there's so much entry, even if any one firm is producing less, there are so many more firms producing that small amount that the total quantity increases. So that's not a contradiction. We can also play with the cost structure here. I'm going to make a very note that when I change this, the fixed cost change as well. So this is just part of the equation I'm using to kind of change what the average total cost curve looks like. But note, one thing to always keep on, I can change the fixed cost too. I can make the fixed cost really big, I can make the fixed cost really small. I can make them 0 if I want. There's a lot of fun things you can do with this. But note, it's always intersecting the marginal cost curve at its lowest point. It's just going to be a mathematical reality. One of the fun things too that becomes really clear as you play with this diagram, that point, in order to make 0 economic profit with the point when equilibrium we would expect to be in order to make 0 economic profit, you have to have the price be the same thing as the cost. And the place that is, and that means that the demand curve has to intersect the marginal cost curve at the same point that the marginal cost curve intersects average total cost. Price has to equal marginal cost in order to get marginal revenue equal marginal cost. So that's our optimal. But in order for there to be 0 economic profit, price also has to equal ACT, which means in equilibrium, all companies will produce at the cheapest point in their average total cost curve. Appreciate how wonderful that is from a societal perspective, rather than having, say, I can't remember. There we go. Can we set? Rather than, let's see, one firm producing 8 units at a cost of 25 each, we might have many firms producing 4 units at the cost of 20 each. So now we're getting each unit at a cost of 20 rather than each unit at a cost of 25. Not because anyone's in charge, not because people say don't go that far up the marginal cost curve, but because the pressures of the market encourage it. Spontaneous order. Now that we get a handle on how this works and thinking in terms of this natural correction and on all the different ways companies can exist, is to think in terms of this 2x2 diagram. Profit margin is the price minus the average variable cost. It is not including any fixed costs. It is just the price minus the cost of goods sold, if you know your accounting. It is how much money each unit gives you. Profit margin is essentially the markup. Like when a company, like a retail store, buys, I know, some thread or something for 50 cents and they sell it for 75 cents. That's a 50% markup. Volume is how many units is typically sold. Is this where lots of customers are buying lots of units, or do they not sell very many things? Volume can be high or low. Profit margin can be high or low. That means we have 4 combinations. Now, obviously, it can be more than just high and low. There's a spectrum here and there's a spectrum over here. But just to sort of categorize things and make things a little easier, it helps us see what's going on. Some companies, some industries have high volume, low margins. Grocery stores are an example of this. On one hand, they make very little money for every unit that they sell. But that's okay. They can still cover their rent. They can still pay their management, and the accountants and so forth, which tend to be fixed costs. They can still pay for their lighting. They can still pay insurance. They can still pay all of those things because they have so many of these little units that the bundle of them together, all these little coins that are put into a bucket, the bundle of them together can cover these upfront costs. This is a sustainable business model. So like some businesses are low volume, like people who sell pianos, right? They surely don't sell very many pianos every year. They might sell only maybe 1 or 2 pianos a month, maybe. I don't know. Maybe not even that. So how do you cover your fixed costs? How do you cover your rent? How do you pay yourself a salary if you're only selling 1 or 2 a month? Well, the only way to do that is to have a very high volume. I'm sorry, the only way to do that is to have a very high profit margin. That, yes, you don't sell very many, but every one you sell, you make a lot of money. You make a lot of money. This is also sustainable. I mention this because sometimes people who work in retail or who see the books, they will see the markups that a lot of stores have and they think, oh, we're still cheating customers. It's not really clear that's true. Because, if you're like working like, I don't know, fabrics and craft store, you're not getting that many customers. Not because you're doing a bad job or not because, oh, it's so expensive, people don't want to do it. Well, that might be part of them. It's also just because people don't buy thread in the same volume as they buy eggs. There's just no way around that. I don't care how cheap you make thread. I don't care how cheap you make yarn. I don't care how cheap you make fake flowers. They're not going to be as popular as eggs and bread and milk, right? It's just not going to happen. So the only way the company can sustain itself, the only way it can make this work is by having a really high profit margin. This is a sustainable business model. So if you ever want to go into business for yourself, you need to figure out which of these boxes you're going to be in. Somebody asked me that they wanted to start a business installing reverse osmosis filters in houses. Because at the time they were just starting to become really popular. But they were like, I don't know what we should charge. I think we should not charge very much. So, we don't want to put anyone off on price. And I'm like, don't do that. That's a terrible idea. You have to charge a lot. You have to charge a lot because you're not selling eggs. Once somebody has a reverse osmosis filter installed, they're never going to talk to you again. It's not like everyone even wants one of these things. So your volume is going to be very low. And the only way you'll be able to pay for things like the van that you're going to purchase, the tools that you might have to buy, any licensing you might have to do, any training you have to do yourself, to practice to make sure you don't screw up on your first actual job, all of those fixed costs are going to be pretty high, and you won't have enough nickels to cover them from all of your various jobs if you charge very little. You have to be high profit. You have to be high profit margin if you're going to make this work. So while these two are sustainable, though, this is not. Because if you're making a lot of money and you're selling a lot of things, people are going to copy you. It might copy you so much that your volume falls and they just go over there. They might copy you so much that you have to lower your prices, and so your profit margin falls. It might be a mixture of the two. Again, this is just a simplification. It's really a spectrum here. But don't expect this to last. Similarly, if you're not making very much money, or if a firm or an industry is not making very much money on every unit, and they're not selling a lot of units, they won't be able to cover their fixed costs, and people will leave. This is an example of the elimination principle. Right? This is just another way to model that same basic idea. Now, again, there's lots of ways to do this. Like, industries vary in lots of different ways, simply besides profit margin and volume. Some of them have to worry about unpredictability. So some businesses and industries rise and fall with the economy, or they rise and fall with the seasons, or they rise and fall with the price of oil. There's some uncertainty in some businesses. Some skill issues become a big issue, right? There's an infinite variety of ways to do this. But this is just a sort of hands-on example so that we can see another way to think about the elimination principle. So when you see a company that you think is making tons and tons and tons of money, don't immediately say, oh, I should copy them. You might want to copy them. But you also might want to stop and think, maybe while they are making tons of money for every unit, maybe they're here. For all you know, maybe they're very low, right, in the volume, and that's unsustainable, right? Another way to think about this too is it illustrates that both of these boxes are basically the same. Right? There's two ways to make a fair amount of money. One is to sell a lot at small amounts, and one is to sell a little at big amounts. And both of those can get you to the same result of profit, and thus zero economic profit. That is why they don't make very much. And again, remember, in the long run, firms will make zero economic profit. In equilibrium, perfectly competitive firms all make the same amount. Of course, we don't live in that world. That is a pressure that we see, and we do see some consistency, certainly within industries, but there's a lot of other considerations in practice. That pure competition model does not reflect the real world. Again, it's not meant to be a goal, it's just a baseline, and there's a lot of complexity. And so as we move forward, we are going to throw in some complexity, and we're going to introduce monopoly.